Most insurance companies have millions of insureds, and they're collecting millions of dollars. And they pool all this money. They know that some percentage of people are going to have auto accidents, and from this pool of cash, they pay the claims. Okay? So it's very much a concept that we can understand. And financially and statistically, we know they use the law of large numbers, and this is how it works. So who else uses pooling? Well, we already talked about casinos use it, right? Right? They pool in all the quarters and all that stuff, and then some small percentage wins, and everybody feels like, well, at least there's a payoff down the road, maybe. So casinos use it. How about municipalities? They also use it. Municipalities will say, like, you know what, it's tough for us to buy insurance, it's expensive. Why don't we pool our money for some exposures, okay? So it's not uncommon at all for municipalities to pool their money. Now, what happens? What does an insurer do that the municipality or the casinos don't do? Well, the municipalities pool some money, right? They pool their cash for claims. And of course, the casinos pool cash for, let's say, occasional payouts. But what are the legal differences between what's happening here? Well, here's a big difference. When municipalities pool their money, they're sharing their resources, okay? They share resources. So suppose Bucks and Montgomery and Chester, they each put, let's say they put $15,000 each into a pool, and it's for vandalism losses. So they have a pool of $45,000, right? Suppose the actual losses for the year exceed $45,000. What happens? Suppose they're $48,000. Well, if the actual losses come in at $48,000 and they only have $45,000, right? So they're down $3,000. Then they just go back and each county pays another $1,000, right? In other words, any deficit they have, they assess among the members. So they go back, they share the money, they share the losses, and they share any deficits. They do. They share. That's the point. They share their resources. The difference between that and insurance is when a consumer or a corporation buys insurance, the buyer of insurance transfers the risk to the insurer. So this is a big legal difference between what's happening. None of this is happening with the casino. It's just cash and all that, paying out occasional winners. Municipalities, they're pooling, but they're sharing losses. But the insurance company is using a contract, right? An insurance policy is a contract. And that's how it's interpreted. It's interpreted according to the American law of contracts. So this insurance policy is a legal document where the buyer pays a premium, that's the consideration the buyer makes, and the insurance company makes a promise. That's the exchange of consideration for the contract, right? The buyer pays a premium, insurer makes a promise to pay. This here, this combination of the buyer paying the premium, the insurer making the promise, is the consideration for the contract. And it makes it enforceable. And it transfers the risk from the buyer to the insurance company. So how can insurance companies do this? Well, it's their whole funding mechanism. It's how they operate, right? Because what do they have? They have surplus. In the corporate world, we call that retained earnings. And it's really just cash. They have surplus. They have, current year's premiums. That they're charging people. So they're always bringing cash in, right? They have last year's surplus, whatever money was left from last year, and they're bringing in premiums this year. So they always have cash coming in. So they sort of are protecting themselves against bankruptcy. Now, what does an insurance company do if they feel like they're taking on too much risk? Well, we talked about this before. They can use reinsurance, right? They can use reinsurance. And the reinsurance is when the insurer lays off some of the risk onto another insurance company. Okay? So the insurer looks and figures out that it has $50 million of premium for Florida property risk. $50 million of premium. And say this really represents $5 billion of actual property loss that they would have to pay. Right? You pay $1,000 for a $150,000 house. Well, it's the same thing here. They've collected $50 million in premium for all these properties, and they're in Florida, right? So what's their big risk having that? Hurricanes, that's right, hurricane risk. So they look and they say, you know what, we've got we've got $5 billion that's at risk. And if a major hurricane slams into Florida, we could have to write a check for $5 billion. We don't have $5 billion laying around. We don't want to do that. That could really hurt us. It could really hurt the insurance company. It could put them out of business. So what do? They go into the reinsurance market, right? Go to the reinsurer, and they say that a reinsurer usually does work this way. It's usually pro rata, which means proportional. They say to the reinsurer, hey, how about if we give you half of this premium? We give you $25 million of the premium, and you agree to pay 50% of all the claims. Up to 50% of $5 billion. Okay? So in this way, what they've done is they've taken their risk and they have laid off half of it onto another insurance company. The reinsurers love this kind of business. They don't have to sell it, advertise it, market it, pay agents, commissions. This is what they do. So Warren Buffett, that's where he made most of his fortune, from Berkshire Hathaway, right? It's a reinsurer. So that's how the insurance company manages its own risk. And it all comes down to this concept of pooling. They pool, and then they pay claims from the pooled money, right? If they find out they've taken on too much risk, then they use reinsurance to lay it off on another insurance company. Okay, now let's go back to our municipalities. Our municipalities, they're just sharing they're sharing smaller risks. So you might ask the question, well, how does it help them? How does pooling for the insurance mechanism help them? Well, your book gives an example, and we'll talk about it. Suppose we have two people, Amy and Sam, and each has a 20% chance of having a loss in the amount of $2,500, right? Every 5 years. Okay? So they're going to have, on average, they're going to have a $2,500 loss once every 5 years. Okay? Now this could be two municipalities, right? In this example, it's two individuals. So suppose they say to each other, hey, why don't we do this? Instead of keeping $2,500 in the safe or in the money market where it earns nothing, why don't we agree to share losses with each other evenly? Let's agree to share all the losses 50-50. And maybe it'll make it better. It'll make it, at least it'll make the losses more predictable. Okay? So let's see if that's really true and if it really does that. Okay? So let's look at our different outcomes. We have no loss, right? So if we want to calculate what the probability is that they're both going to have no loss, Amy's not going to have a loss this year, and Sam's not going to have a loss this year, right? Well, the probability is actually 80% for Amy times 80% for Sam, so it's 64%. Okay? The probability that Sam has a loss, but Amy does not. So the probability that Sam has a loss is 20%, times the probability that Amy does not is 80%. So the probability of this happening is 16%, right? Now we look at the probability that Amy has a loss and Sam has no loss. That's really the same thing. 20 for Amy, 80% chance that Sam does not have a loss, and we get 16%. And our last real possibility is that Amy and Sam both have a loss. That probability is 20% for each of them. It's 4% for both of them. And you see this sums to 100%. So pooling really doesn't change anything as far as the objective probability. But what pooling changes is the probability that each of them is going to have to pay out money, and how much money. That's what it really changes. Because over here we said, well, Amy's probability is once every 5 years she pays out $2,500. Same thing for Sam. But now that's changed. The probability that they're not going to have any expense at all has been reduced from 80% down to 64%, because they've agreed to do this sharing thing, right? So what has happened is their expense has been made more predictable.